Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. Good to be back. I want to go ahead, talk a little bit of college hoops. So we obviously do a ton of college hoops, especially this time of year. You can forgive me, over the last probably 48 hours or so, the channel's been a little bit quiet. Little football game called the Super Bowl that I think had most of your guys' attention. And I want to dive back into college hoops with what I think is probably the biggest story of the last 3, 4, 5 days, okay? So obviously on the weekend on the court, we saw some real, tangible, important results. Duke losing at Clemson, Auburn losing at home to Florida, which was one of the most stunning results of the season, even though I know Florida is really good, but they didn't have Elijah Martin, whatever. Well, I bring it up because outside of what was going on the court, I think the most interesting story was off of it, where we now officially have a coaching opening at one of the most intriguing jobs in America, one of the biggest brands in college hoops. Torres is talking, of course, about the Indiana Hoosiers. By the way, as we start talking this coaching search, make sure you're following our Torres on Indiana page, Torres on Indiana on Twitter. Late breaking news, information, thoughts on the job. We have an Indiana student helping me run the page. Anytime I'm talking about Indiana on this show, by the way, it will be posted on the Torres Pod YouTube page. So Torres on Indiana for all your late breaking Indiana news. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. And let's go ahead and talk because obviously, look, this job has been open now for a while. And I saw something interesting that kind of came across my Twitter feed on Monday. Last time we talked about this was probably last Thursday. I actually hinted at it during our live stream. I think some news is coming later this week about Mike Woodson's future. Turns out it came about 20 minutes after we got off air. We did a reaction, what's going to happen, what it means, this and that. Well, on Friday, it becomes official. On Saturday, you lose to Michigan. And on Sunday, I think it's just full speed ahead with the coaching search. Now, I think most Indiana fans, I don't want to speak for them, but it feels like we appreciate Woody. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for your great playing days, but we're focused on the next guy now, okay? And so why I want to talk about it now, we've done already a couple thoughts on the job itself, but I saw an interesting tweet that I want to go ahead and dive into because it did catch my attention. And it is from a reporter that covers Indiana that has been covering Indiana for years. And he put out an interesting tweet, an interesting article that he wrote. And I just want to discuss it really quick and what it means in the grand scheme of the Indiana coaching search. So the writer is a guy by the name of Jeff Rabjohns. He's been covering Indiana as long as I've been following college hoops. Works for the 24/7 outlet. And on Monday morning, he put out an article, and this was the tweet that he used to kind of contextualize the article. It says, quote, Indiana's opening will be the most coveted position in the coaching carousel. 24/7 Sports national analysts Bossy Hoops, which is Eric Bossy, great recruiting writer, and Isaac Trotter explain why and give their thoughts on the IU coaching search. And so what I want to do now is go ahead and dive into that. Is Indiana going to ultimately be the best job available? And then more importantly, if they are, even if they're not, what does it mean in the grand scheme of this search and the kind of candidate they can get? So first off, as far as the tweet is concerned, listen, this to me is not a knock on Jeff Rabjohns, or it's not a knock on Eric Bossy. I've DM'd with Eric Bossy a few times. He's great at what he does. Don't know Isaac Trotter, but I see the work that he puts out. Kid clearly is very plugged in college hoops. Respect the hell out of him. Okay, so not a knock at all. I think it's a little early to say, though, that this is going to be the best job that opens up. I think it's certainly going to be in the short conversation, and I think certainly when it's all said and done, it probably will be, but it is a little early on that. One, obviously, look, we've talked a lot about North Carolina over the last couple of weeks. I don't believe North Carolina is going to ultimately open up. Should mention we are actually recording this before the North Carolina-Clemson game on Monday night, a game I don't necessarily expect North Carolina to win, but even if they don't, I don't know that it really impacts Hubert Davis in any way, shape, or form. Bottom line is I think the administration has his back. He's already talking about staff changes and bringing in a GM. And I will say, the back half of the schedule is pretty bad once you get past Clemson. At Syracuse, NC State, Virginia, at Florida State, Miami, and at Virginia Tech, all before You play Duke. I think you probably should go after 6 games? You should go 6-0 going into the Duke game. You go 6-0 from here. That's 20 wins in the regular season. You're probably on the fringes of the NCAA tournament, even in a bad ACC. And I think even if they miss the tournament, as long as they don't totally bottom out, he's coming back. I mean, when he's talking publicly about coaching job, staff changes and bringing in a GM, that means he's had that conversation with his AD. They've probably already figured out the funding for that job. And now it is, how do we get ready for the offseason to make sure that we don't have another season like this? Now, I do think if they completely fall apart, UNC could open up. I think alternatively, I also think that even if they don't fall apart, I think he's mostly going to get next year. So North Carolina could open up. I'll say this too. I think Texas is maybe a little bit more up in the air than a lot of people think. This is a job that, listen, if you want to argue Indiana's history is better, all of that, I'm not going to argue with you. But Texas overall has lost, let's see here, 3 of their last 5. And on top of that, they have lost 6 of their last 8 overall. They're currently 4-7 in the SEC. That's still probably good enough to get you into the NCAA tournament. But just lost to Arkansas, just lost to Vandy. That is not good. And what I will say is Texas is a very coveted job in coaching circles, okay? It's a job that Chris Beard, who we'll talk about in a minute, he thought he could turn Texas kind of into a new blood, into a school that can compete at the highest levels of college basketball. It didn't work out for him personally, but they have great NIL. They're in the SEC. There's no expense that is spared at that place. I mean, if Texas opens up, I think it's going to draw a lot of interest. So the point I'm trying to make is I think it's a little early to presume that Indiana is going to be the best job open. What I will counteract that with, what I will say is, in my opinion, what is worth noting is that whether other jobs open or not, Indiana, in my opinion, is still going to be coveted. And I do think the job opening right now, in my opinion, is very important, okay? Because if North Carolina somehow opens up, it ain't going to be until the end of the ACC tournament, okay? It's still going to be another 3-4 weeks before North Carolina were to even make a decision. Same with Texas, who is very clearly on the bubble. Both those teams are bubble teams, and so I think those ADs, if they had to make a move, wouldn't evaluate until after the conference tournaments. And so I only bring it up to very simply say that I do give Indiana credit. They knew they weren't bringing Woodson back. They knew he wasn't the answer. They knew he was never going to be the answer, and so they moved quickly, and now they can really get a head start on this process, okay? That is hiring a search firm. And I know search firms kind of get a bad rap, but search firms do provide a role. It's to do background. It's to add context. It's, hey, we like this candidate. Is there something we should know? I hate to say it, but a guy like Chris Beard, we know there was a very public arrest. Charges were dropped. It's worth noting. But, Indiana's going to want to know a little bit more context behind that before they hire him. You could say the same for a lot of candidates on the board. And so I do give Indiana credit for making this move now so that they can ultimately do the proper vetting, and then boom, season ends, whatever coach you want. By the way, this helps you find out who's a realistic candidate, who isn't. Maybe there are guys publicly that even, an Aaron Torres, whoever are talking about, that aren't interested in the job. And maybe there are guys that are really good that we don't know about that are interested in it. And so I just bring it up because that's the benefit of doing this now, is you really get a 3-week start for the best candidates. Again, there are other jobs open, but no disrespect to Florida State or Miami. The candidate pool for Indiana is going to be better than those jobs. And so now, I just kind of want to say that, I don't know if it's going to be the best job, but what I do think is important is it's going to be a good job. It is going to be coveted. And let's just talk a little bit more about some of these candidates, which I know we've done already. But listen, nobody turns down a good candidate list, right? And as far as I'm concerned, as far as what I think about, is that to me, when I think about this job, the one thing that does stand out to me is that, one, I believe there are some candidates that you have to call, even if they're probably going to say no. Listen, you're going to make fun of me. I don't really care. I think you have to call Brad Stevens. Indiana guy. He's out of coaching. He's in a front office role. Now, we talked about him last week. He has maybe the best job in the NBA right now because he's not coaching. The travel load isn't as good or isn't as crazy. But he's got a young, dynamic team with young, dynamic stars that are just now in the heart of their primes. I mean, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, you got a good 5 or 6 year runway with those guys still in their primes. And that's probably bringing you another championship or two before it's all said and done. So it's hard for me to see Brad Stevens leaving the NBA. I think you got to make the call, though, right? I think you got to make the call. Billy Donovan, we talked about last week. The Bulls stink. The Bulls are going in full rebuild mode. The Bulls trade Zach LaVine. And I said it before, and I'll keep saying it. I truly believe that if Kentucky had been willing to wait last year, Billy Donovan would have picked up the phone and would have seriously considered that job. He just figured, you know what, I'm not getting fired in Chicago. But Kentucky alternatively was like, we can't wait. Like, we can't wait. If you remember, they were in the play-in tournament, and if they won, it was going to be another 2 weeks. So Kentucky chooses Mark Pope, whatever. But I just bring it up because I believe in my heart that Billy Donovan was interested, whether or not he would have ultimately gotten the job. Whether or not he would have ultimately, but I'm tripping over my words here. Billy Donovan would have considered the job. Kentucky just didn't want to wait. And so now, a year later, you're not going to be retained by the Bulls after this season. I think Billy Donovan would consider it. He's in his late 50s. I don't think he wants to retire. Maybe he gives college one more try. Listen, the other calls you got to make, you got to call Jay Wright. He's not doing it. If Jay Wright didn't even pick up the phone from Kentucky, I don't see him doing Indiana. I've seen other people suggest Tony Bennett. Tony Bennett's an interesting one to me because I am not totally sold that even if Tony Bennett were interested in coming back, that he would necessarily be my number one candidate. Now, it sounds crazy because you'd sit there and say, well, Torres, blah, 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 blah. He won a national. How do you say no to a guy that won a national championship? Listen, you probably don't, but I would have some questions for Tony Bennett. First of all, Tony Bennett, I use this stat all the time. Since 2018, that was the year he lost to UMBC. The only tournament in which they won an NCAA tournament game since 2018 was the 2019 national championship run. So he did win 6 tournament games that year in 2019, but never won a single tournament game after. How about this? Mike Woodson has more years since 2018 winning at least one NCAA tournament game than Tony Bennett does. Mike Woodson has only been on the job for 3 full years. This is year 4. Year 1, he wins a play-in game. I think it was Wyoming. Year 2, he wins a game before losing to Miami in the second round. So Mike Woodson has actually won more NCAA tournament games since he got the job than Tony Bennett did in his last 2 or 3 years. Lost in the first round in 2018, made a run in 2019, 21, 23, and 24, lost in the first round. And I would have to sit there and say, okay, you've had a year off, but what makes you think that things are going to be different going forward? And so what has changed? What makes you believe that you can win in the NIL era? I'm not saying you say no. What I am saying is you probably have to have a pretty serious conversation about, is this the right guy? Is this the right moment? And why is he going to be different than in years past? Okay. So those are some of the big names that you got to call. Then I think from there, it's the names that we've talked about. I still believe in my heart of hearts, Chris Beard. I think he wants the job. Listen, maybe it's crazy. I know. But in that game against Kentucky last week, goes into halftime, and what does he talk about? They say, what is the impact that this, and this is having? What does Chris Beard say? He says, well, listen, I learned that from working under Coach Bobby Knight. And I know Chris Beard didn't actually coach under Knight at Indiana. He did at Texas Tech. But Beard is a Knight disciple. I know people who have worked for Chris Beard. The way that he is described to me is the way that I have heard others describe Bobby Knight. Perfectionist, no stone unturned. The old Bobby Knight thing would be that they used to, if they lost a game, they used to come back to the office and sit there and watch film until 6 or 7 a.m. trying to figure out what went wrong. And Beard has the same approach. I've heard the exact same thing about Chris Beard. If we lose a game, we're staying in the office until we figured out what went wrong, even if that means we're not getting home until our kids are getting up to go to school the next day. So I just bring it up because I think Beard I feel very confident. I think Beard wants the job. I think if Beard was offered the job, I think Beard would take it. And I go back to what I said the other day. I think he was pretty close to actually taking the Arkansas job. It sounds crazy, but that thing fell apart in the 11th hour. I think part of it was Hunter Yurchek got wind that, hey, John Calipari might be available, and you don't turn down John Calipari even for Chris Beard. But I think, listen, he's not going to spend the rest of his career at Ole Miss. That's no disrespect to Ole Miss. It's just the truth. Last couple names, one, Todd Golden, talked a lot about him. Bruce Pearl, obviously, look, Bruce Pearl has ties to the state of Indiana. First job was at Southern Indiana. Listen, Bruce Pearl's the head coach of the number 1 team in the country. I think the thing that you have to seriously consider with Bruce Pearl, I think you investigate if he could potentially be interested. But the problem with Bruce Pearl, he's probably going to be coaching into April. And so if you couldn't wait for Billy Donovan if you were Kentucky a year ago because it was April, I don't know that you can wait until, April 11th or 12th to even talk to Bruce Pearl, because I know Auburn just lost. I think it's going to take a miracle for them to lose before like the Elite Eight. So now you're talking late March. You're talking about 3-4 weeks that job is open. If Mike Woodson is out after the Big Ten tournament, you're going to wait another 3 weeks to get Bruce Pearl when that portal is about to open up, when recruiting is going full speed ahead. I just don't buy it. Todd Golden, I think I just mentioned. The other name that seems to be picking up buzz, and probably justifiably so, Ben McCollum, right, from Drake. I think everybody knows his story, but I said it the other day, 4 national championships as the head coach in D2 at Northwest Missouri State. Guy's like 43 years old. 4 national championships before the age of like 45 is insane. Comes up to D1, immediately has success. Drake is currently 22-2 overall right now. They have not lost a game since the first week of January. They are comfortably atop the Missouri Valley. And I think what's kind of crazy about Drake is that basically Ben McCollum brought a lot of his roster from Northwest Missouri State with him to Drake. And so I only bring it up because, listen, this guy is winning. He's winning at a high level, and he's proving that he can do it in different spots at different levels. Now, I know it's going to be a different kind of player that you have to recruit to Indiana. Doesn't change the fact that listen, if you can get it done at if you can get it done at Northwest Missouri State, you can get it done in the Big 12. If you can coach, you can coach. I truly believe that. Speaking of which, by the way, Dusty May. Dusty May, listen, I'm not going to play the sound. It's been played and overplayed, but he was actually asked about the job on Saturday after Michigan won at Indiana. Gave a nice long speech where he never said, I would not take the job under any circumstances at Indiana. He said all the right things. I'm grateful for Michigan, blah, 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 blah. But it also came out on Monday that he is currently early engagement on a new contract at Michigan. So you do wonder if he just used Indiana as leverage. So that's kind of my thoughts. What does it mean? Is it actually the best job? Who are legitimate candidates? Who are not? And I'll just tell you, we're going to keep the conversation on this going for probably the next 4 or 5 weeks. It is a fascinating job. I think it's a good job, and I cannot wait to see what Indiana can do. If you enjoy this video, make sure you're subscribed. Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos going up every single day. Also, make sure you're subscribed, following our Torres on Indiana page, Torres on Indiana, for all your late-breaking Indiana